Okay, this is the 14th session. In other words, we first touch on the first six Chinese characters of Dao De Jing, and after that, this is, I guess, six more sessions to reinforce. Um, but I guess I really would like to take this chance here and now to clarify something. I am not teaching. This is, I guess, 道德经 or Taoism teaching, but I'm not doing teaching. I'm just being uh, one of the, I guess, member of this somewhat book club, um, basically sharing my learning experience of it. That, basically I started the study somewhat, I guess I could say, almost full scale, a couple of years way back, and with my own uh, life experience, which obviously everybody, you have your own, and I have mine. We're not going to be exactly the same. So, at different, I guess, stage or point of your life, you probably will come up with different kind of realization, and hopefully, eventually, we're all going to the same point, right? The ultimate enlightenment, if we ever get there. Um, so, what I want to say here is, I do welcome any of you or all of you to drop your comments, and let's compare notes, your life experience. We could. I think it would really benefit everybody if we could have some kind of a discussion here. Of course, I'll leave that part to you guys. So anyway, I'll go on in this 14th session and to, I guess, share a little more about my own personal understanding based on my life experience. Uh, you know, uh, so anyway, so Taoism, a big thing about Taoism, uh, a lot of Chinese have heard of it. 无为而治, meaning managing with inaction or minimal intervention. Okay, so that sounds a little bit confusing even for the contemporary Chinese, because, oh, so we just sit there, don't do nothing, and everything is managed? Really? I think you can't not really take, just like anything else, you can't really take things out of the context and then just go by the surface, the face value. That would not be wise, would not be fair, and it could be totally, I guess, misleading, right? So my personal, I guess, I guess the way my personal take, let's put it this way, is that this you got to have a precondition, right? So remember we talked about what was China. China was basically the uh, hardcore, the center of the civilization, which basically, at least three cultural pillars: the Taoism, the Confucianism, and the Buddhism, right? So Confucius and Lao Tzu, who was the supposedly the author of Dao De Jing, they were, people of the same time. They actually uh, met with one another, right? So Lao Tzu, the author of Dao De Jing, he was a royal archive clerk, or I don't know what was the official rank. They may or may not even back then, had a rank for that, but that was what he was doing, right? Officially, made a living out of it, and that's the time. I would say it's equivalent to the Google without the Google. I mean, most of other people have no absolutely, anywhere near that kind of access to all the books that he had his hands on. So he was, basically able to read a lot of, history on the Royal Archive before he eventually left the job. So I guess that somehow contributed to the fact that, made him a wise man, right? So he was somewhat in, well, we're talking about around 500 years BC, right? So he was somewhere around the same historical period of that Zhou Wang, the crown prince I mentioned earlier, who compiled together this I Ching. Um, you know, um, so both actually, because they were Taoism, were promoting the same idea once again. Managing with inaction or minimal intervention. So I would say you have to do this based on the edification. Okay. So what is edification? Once again, China as the center of the civilization. It's like its inner circle, right? So on the outside Louvre, there were, basically the prince states, the nobilities, royalties, or even, the cousins, the sons, the grandsons, whoever, you know, uh, anyway, the nobility and royalties, they were given certain, territories, around the capital. And the capital back then was interchangeable word with China, right? So then, and then outside the prince states, which means on the border of the prince states, with tribute states, which basically, you know, uh, you know, states like Vietnam, Korea. Basically, they were still part of the civilization, but they were not within the same, I guess, the legal state, right? So basically, the way it worked was the edification basically keep promoting, okay, edifying the people within the border, with all these values, the core values, and we just mentioned the three major cultural core values. And among the three, I would say personal. Again, this is my personal take, right? So the Confucianism and Taoism, they're kind of like a yin and yang. They work kind of against each other and work with each other. Uh, I guess compensate or yeah, I guess somehow compensate, but they kind of push each other in this indefinite circle, and that's how yin and yang works. Anyway, let's say well, used to be an old way, the Republicans and the Democrats, right? Supposedly, at least for a while, the Democrats were better working at increase the social wealth, and the Democrats were somehow better at the social wealth distribution or redistribution. So that worked in a yin and yang system pretty well until the whole political system got corrupted. And I'm not going to get into politics, but anyway, so that was another yin and yang in the contemporary American political system. Used to work better than today. But whereas in ancient Chinese systems, we're talking about the Confucianism and the Daoism. So how did that work? Once again, if the edification worked, meaning the people, the commoners, they would actually, because of this edification, so morally, they would have much better ethic governed behaviors around the society. You would have a lot better citizens in the society. So in the old way, to measure whether it was a great society, the Chinese say 路不拾遗，夜不闭户. So what does that mean? That means at night you don't really need to close your windows, your doors, let alone lock it. Hey, nobody was gonna take anything from your household. All the neighbors they have very, very high, uh, I guess, moral values. Yeah, I guess they take, pride, a lot of pride. They would not steal from you. That's one side. The other is like, they're not worried about 3 meals a day. So they had the material foundation to support the high moral value too. Remember, we're talking about the Chinese illiterate, right? So these were undereducated, uh, but yet the education did all the works. The educated Chinese, the Chinese literate, were basically either they made it into the Chinese elite circle, or at least they tried, right? So the educated, the edified, basically you're talking about two different kinds of Chinese in ancient Chinese society. So a good Chinese society, um, they don't have to, close the window, the door, the gate of their, front yard at night. And if you drop anything in the middle of the road, or on the side of the road, you don't worry about it. Tomorrow you go back, you will still see them there. Just pick them up and take them back. That will be the good society. Basically, it's all governed by the moral value and ethic rules. People just automatically follow. Okay, so this is Taoism. Basically teaching, the system. Suppose that's the way it works. But according to Taoism, if your society is not like that, then unfortunately you're gonna have to, enforce what was the ethic rules, with the criminal code, right? So in the contemporary societies today around the world, I was on a filming trip around Europe. In Germany, I did not have to worry about, I left things behind. I went back and picked it up. But in France, they came to steal from you. And I'm talking about Paris. It's not just one experience. Almost every time I went to Paris, I didn't want to say I got robbed, but people come here to either these con artists try to cheat out of you, or they just steal from you. I was sitting there, in Paris, in the central part of Paris, really great. I forgot which street, but it was supposedly great area. And I was sitting at a table outside, a cafe on the pavement, by the street, with the director of our filming team. So we were talking, and this little girl came up to us, spoke French, with a piece of paper, act like she was selling something to us. So we were like, "Oh, thank you. Please, we don't need anything. Thank you." And she left. And then just 2 minutes after this little girl, well, teenager, probably 11, 12, something like that, the director said, "Oh man, I know what she did." I was like, "What did she do?" She said, "I don't see my phone anymore. She put that piece of paper on top of my phone, and then she picked it up with that paper, and then with that phone in there, and took it away." And then later we asked people around, they were like, "Oh yeah, that happens a lot." And I was just like, all those people, they were sitting there, and they knew this happens, the locals. They knew this happened, and they saw what was happening. Nobody said a thing. Okay, that little girl just basically took things. So that is the kind of society by the Chinese, ancient Chinese standard, not well ruled, because hey, the people, they don't have I guess the proper ethic value there. as compared to Germany. And I'm sure if you go to Italy, at least every time I went there, you need to worry in street too. Um, Not in Germany. Uh, Actually, if you go to like a Sweden, Norway, you don't really worry about that kind of things. So by the ancient Chinese standard, at least by Taoism standard, those are better societies. Okay, you don't need a criminal law to enforce that. People know right from wrong. But so only when it is on that basis, when you have such citizens, who have the moral value, up to a certain standard, then the inaction for managing or minimal intervention. This intervention basically, I guess, referring to the criminal law, um, because by the Taoist standard, if one society, the state, the government, the royal court, constantly, heavy hand, basically meddle all the affairs, that was considered harsh on the taxpayers. Okay, but let's say the same, Han, the Han dynasty were divided into the East Han and the West Han. Basically, one was earlier, the other was later. So the earlier Han actually ruled its state, its kingdom, the empire, totally just with Taoism, meaning, they didn't have to have the heavy hand on a lot of things. Basically, that was the way the Chinese were. Just leave them alone, leave the farmers, the taxpayers alone, and they'll do really well. The economy will boom, And hey, you just sit there, collect your tax. What's wrong with that? Of course, that was great, especially when the earlier Han Dynasty, when they did that. Why? Because this was right after decades of wars, and the taxpayer, they need a break. They needed a break to need a to be able to first be able to survive before they could actually produce enough and then to pay the tax for you. So that emperor was really smart. Basically, just leave the taxpayers alone. And when the taxpayers needed help, right after all this war, chaos, the empire actually, the royal court gave some help too. But then the later part of Han Dynasty, the Confucianism, for the first time in the ancient Chinese history, start to dominate I guess, the Chinese academia, and started basically kind of crack down on all the other philosophies. So the Taoism started to take a backseat, or to be put on the back burner, more precisely. But then this was also because the later part of Han, the Han, the Han dynasty was a lot better. Basically recovered from all those war disasters. So they were able, I guess, to do all that. Still, for the ancient Chinese historians, any state have this harsh criminal code, enforced in lieu of the edification to promote the moral values. Not a great society. Okay, that is basically getting close in the I guess to its own end in the downturn. Okay, on its way down, and a lot of it was like that. So this basically just tell you what is the 无为而治, the management by inaction or minimal intervention, the condition, right? Once again, you gotta have the people already have that, I guess, ethic value that rule the society already. So you don't need this. I already gave the example on the contemporary Japanese society. You would see that. But then Singapore would be just the opposite. I'm not saying the Singaporeans do not have the moral value. They do. But the criminal there is pretty, let's just say, everywhere, okay? And it works really proactively. So both are Asian countries. They both use Chinese characters, somehow, somewhat to some degree, but so they both took some, I guess you could see some of this Confucianism in their, somewhere in their culture, right? But then also, what about what I just mentioned, Norway, Sweden, or Germany, at least, certain parts of Germany, they never had anything to do with Taoism, right? But they still basically have this, higher moral value. I know some people start saying something. I'm not getting there. I'm just observing the mainstream, okay? You don't tell me a certain neighborhood in certain city, whatever happened. I know what happened. I'm not going to put my comment on that. So basically, when you have a society like that, you don't need this Confucianism, basically trying to tell everybody what to do, and all this government officials, the royal court government officials, keep doing this and that, punishing people. When you have to enforce everything with the law, that means your basically ethnic rules are failing. It's not governing the behaviors of citizens of the society. Of course, the United States is totally different. Here, from day one, it was supposed to be rule of law. Of course, wow, I'm in Texas. Of course, I missed all those days when basically, whoever is a faster gun, but today is, rule of law. We're supposed to be, everybody's supposed to be equal before the law. Really, well, let's just believe that conveniently. So that was that about 无为而治, okay? Managing with inaction or by minimal intervention. That is for this session. Ciao. Until next session.